Good morning, YouTube. I just want to pick up on some ideas I started thinking about yesterday to do with, well, I called the video God and Objective Morality. But it's to do with how we understand those terms and what I see as some similarities, not in terms of the content of what's going on there, but in terms of some of the thinking. I should just preface this just by saying really where I'm coming from in this. You know, my interest, I mean, obviously I do have an interest in morality and I do have an interest in ethics and all those things, but my specific interest in this discussion is really quite a narrowly focused and probably ridiculously anally attentive set of ideas, and it's really to do with language and thought. That's one of my key areas of, let's call it research, but my interests anyway. Language and thought, particularly language and thought around terms and concepts like knowledge, belief, certainty, understanding, what it means to know something, those kind of terms. And now I know we all know what those terms mean, but where I'm coming to that from, I'm coming from that from a field of study sometimes called cognitive linguistics, embodied cognition, these kind of ideas. And within that frame of reference, what those terms mean is not simply what you will find if you look in the dictionary for those terms. What it means in that kind of context is, you know, what is going on in our minds when we use those concepts. What is going on inside ourselves? What is the machinery of thought? You know, when Steven Pinker writes about this stuff, he talks about language being a window into human nature, and that's really part of it for me. What is being revealed in those language forms? And most of them are metaphorical and figurative, as I'm sure you know, and things are coming out of that. Things are being revealed in that about the way we think, and about the kinds of logic that drives our thinking, and that's of interest to me, particularly in these areas, as I say, to do with knowledge, belief, understanding, certainty, those kind of things. And in the video I made yesterday to do with God and objective morality, I'm kind of speculating, but it's a little bit beyond speculation, to do with, you know, what forms of thinking are being evoked when we make certain kinds of claims for knowledge. I mean, specifically in that video, those are claims for knowledge about what you might call moral facts, the moral facts of a situation, whether something is morally right or morally wrong. Where is that claim for knowledge about that? How is it being made? How is sense being made of that kind of claim? And how is it that we can feel like we understand that and be certain about that? And those kind of things. Where does authority lie in those claims? That kind of idea. And this is, as I said, this is about language and thought. So it is really about how our thinking works and how that thinking is revealed in the language that we speak, which isn't always as clear as it might appear on the surface. Well, it's never as clear as it might appear on the surface. As clear as our language is so rife and so shot through with metaphors that it's endlessly fascinating to me. Okay, so what's that got to do with God and objective morality? I mean, what I'm suggesting there is that this term objective is part of a really complex set of metaphorical understandings, metaphorical ways of thinking, things that, you know, there is actually correlates of this in the structure of the brain itself. But our brain is operating metaphorically. Our mind is operating metaphorically. The non-conscious processes by which we come to make sense and understand the world is largely driven by metaphor and other kinds of figurations. And objective is one of those. Objective is one of those. And it's quite an important one. I mean, we tend to think very simply about words like objective, that it's just the part of a binary. There's objective and the subjective, but it's not really simple as that, I don't think. I mean, objective, tell me if you think this is bullshit, but this is how far I've got with objective so far, in terms of an analysis which would be to do with as I said, what's sometimes called conceptual metaphor analysis, an analysis of how our understanding of that term is being formed. I think objective, as is commonly used, both by theists when they want to claim divine authority, They claim that objective morality lies with God, that kind of objective, and a certain kind of use of objective by people who would like the objectivity of science applied to their morality but don't want to invoke God for understandable reasons. So I'm seeing a similarity in the kinds of terminology that's being used, which to me is hinting at a similar kind of thought structure being mobilized to provide something like authority, the simulation of authority for these claims about moral certainties. Okay, so objectivity. I think objectivity hinges on two specific metaphors. It's two specific metaphors. One is a spatial metaphor to do with distance and separation and detachment. We often use objective as a kind of synonym for detached, don't we? If you say we're thinking objectively about something, it's almost as if we're detaching ourselves from the thing itself. You know, that thing is not pressing up against us. We're not feeling, it's not inside of us for sure. We are detached. We have a distanced view. It gives us some oversight. It gives us an overview. We get to see the big picture. All these phrases that we use to describe what that kind of objectivity are ultimately spatial metaphors. We're imagining the thing that we're talking about over there and ourselves over here in this detached position, unaffected by the thing itself. We're claiming separation from involvement in that thing itself, an involvement which, if we were involved, which might contaminate and bias our understanding. So by claiming that we're detached from it, that gives us an apparent position of oversight. So I think objectivity partly mobilises this spatial metaphor, which is why in the video I made yesterday, you find in both theists and atheists who want to say objective using that spatial metaphor. The location for the authority of objective truth is outside of space and time. It's beyond the universe. It's kind of transcendence. It's over, on top of or outside of or over. It's over there somewhere. Now sometimes in theists, obviously, it tends to be kind of anthropomorphized into a god and given other kind of attributes like creativity or judgment or those kind of properties. But nevertheless, the authority for God's objectivity is at least partly derived from the fact that we push God, or theists push God out of the universe and give it the capacity to have oversight. God knows what is right and wrong because he's got the big picture. He sees, the bird fall from the sky, whatever it says in the Bible. He sees the whole damn thing. And that gives him an objectivity, a detachment, an oversight, a big picture view that those of us who are down here on the ground, involved, don't have. So as I said, God's authority derives from the objectivity and the detachment implied by the objectivity, by that objectivity in that terms. And the same kind of thing happens within claims for authority within non-theistic understandings of objectivity, I think. Again, in many atheistic or scientific empirical claims for objectivity, there is still a sense of detachment. We do still talk about being outside of space and time, detached from. The ideal experimenter position is detached from the thing that's understood, being studied. It's still that sense of detachment, and I'm not decrying for one moment the success of that in scientific terms, but it does have to be carefully applied. The ideal scientific position is one of, as I say, scientific detachment and over-there-ness. And when I say it has to be carefully applied, that's really important. Donna Haraway talks about that position often being alluded to even when there's clearly no objectivity involved. She talks about it in relation to things like gender studies, and she calls it the God trick. The God trick is that way of being, that way of presenting information as if it is coming from a detached outside source, as if the person making a kind of empirical claim is outside and has access to that privileged position where they do have oversight and can see the big picture, the God trick. As I say, sometimes it works really well, but when it's mobilized for supporting claims which don't really lend themselves to that kind of study, then it's bogus, and it's a fairly naked bid for authority. But in my terms, what I'm interested in is the objectivity, the metaphor of objectivity, our understanding of what objectivity is, whether it lie with God or whether it lie with something else, is still based on that same image, this image of this spatial metaphor, where the position by which that authority is claimed comes from its detachment in imaginary space. Okay, make sense? Objectivity. All right. Actually, Thomas Nagel calls it the view from nowhere. That position, which he associates with science, which is very successful, but is often used as a way of claiming authority, which isn't really deserved. The view from nowhere. So that's the first understanding of objective. The second is to do with, and we often mix metaphors in these things, by the way, just as a side thing. The other metaphor, which I think is a key one at play within claims for objectivity, is to do with objects, actually, and it's perhaps no surprising, given the word objectivity. When we want to try to make something, to claim that something is objective, like a fact, we try to make it into a certain kind of object, or we treat it as if it's a kind of object, like an objective fact. I mean, I can't resist doing this gesture with my hands, because metaphors play out in gesture as well. But we want to try to make that fact as object-like as possible. In fact, we want to give that object, that imaginary metaphorical object, as prototypical a set of properties as possible for objects. We might want to say that this object that we're saying, this object-like fact that we want to say is a piece of knowledge and that is objective, is hard and well-bounded and permanent, like a rock or a piece of steel, a piece of moulded steel. And the harder it is, the better, because the prototypical object is hard, bounded, and not subject to change. And we quite often see when people are trying to claim for objectivity, rightly or wrongly, that they use metaphors of hardness and boundedness and permanence, just like a rock is like that. And we're evoking the image of the object, the hard object, when we're trying to say that we are in possession of a kind of hard fact. This comes up in a number of writings about this kind of stuff. Actually, there's an educationalist called David Perkins who talks about knowledge in these terms, and he talks about what he calls possessive knowledge, and it's those items of knowledge which exist almost like hard objects. You can almost pick it up. Battle of Hastings, 1066, there it is. Atomic weight of mercury, there it is. Boiling point of water at sea level, there it is. It's like an object, Whereas other kinds of knowledge, not so easy, and we tend to ignore those when we're trying to use words like objective. Because, of course, knowledge isn't an object. Facts aren't objects. And we might try to say they're objects in order to claim their some kind of status for them, as foundational, as permanent, as universal, as those kind of things. But we have to be careful about that, because a lot of things that we want to claim as facts don't really function even metaphorically as hard objects. I mean, things like social facts. Social facts aren't hard objects. Social facts are notoriously unbounded and notoriously slippery and do change over time. It isn't to say they're not useful. We do use social facts all the time. We use statistics and we use demographics and we use all the kind of information in all the social sciences, and they're very useful. But they don't respond to that. They don't act as metaphorical objects in the same way that some kind of empirical scientific facts do, for example. They don't stay where you put them. They don't act in quite that same way. They can. If a social fact was an object, it wouldn't be well bounded. It'd be a fluffier edges. It would perhaps be lighter. You'd have to treat it more carefully. It would be more contingent. It would change shape if you pushed it too hard. It doesn't say it's not useful, but it's different. And some facts are so evanescent that you can barely hold them at all. But again, they're still useful. You just got to be careful about what kind of fact you're dealing with. So yeah, and again with these these claims for that kind of objectivity, just like the claims of detachment for objectivity, are not specific to either theists or atheists. You know, atheists, I beg your pardon, theists, people who trust in God and believe that the authority comes from God and moral authority lies with God, from God who is in this detached position outside of space and time, over there somewhere, also tend to claim that the truths that God lays down, the facts in that kind of sense, are hard, you know, and permanent. There's lots of claims for the permanence of scriptural truths. That's kind of how it presents itself, as if these things are bounded objects, firm in space. In fact, there's rock metaphors run right through the Bible. Peter is the rock on which Jesus built his church. This is this idea of truths and moral statements being object-like, hard object-like fact, runs right through a lot of religious teachings. But it also runs through atheist understandings too. You know, when we want to stake a claim, we try to stake a claim by saying that the objective fact we're referring to is hard, and we try to make it as hard as possible. We try to say it's firm. We try to say it's solid. These are the kinds of language that we use because we associate authority and foundational status with these hard objects. For, as I say, those reasons I've already said, because they fulfill that metaphorical function. Okay, so that's kind of where I'm going with that. Of course, there's the content of a particular set of truths, the content of a particular set of proposals, whether they be moral statements or statements about physical reality or whatever, is kind of irrelevant to this discussion for me, although it's within the context of this discussion at least. Obviously it's relevant elsewhere. But what I'm seeing here, just to recap, I'm sorry this has been so long, what I'm seeing is very, very similar metaphors being played out. And not just individual metaphors, coherent, organised, metaphorical structures of language and thought, which to me is a window into human nature, as Steven Pinker would say, a window into the way that the mind is functioning and how it is making sense. And that sense-making process around terms like objective seems to be functioning the same both in theist and atheist communities. It's an objectivity which is based on the idea that what is objective isn't simply the opposite of subjective. It's a very particular construction of what objective means. Not in a dictionary, but in our heads, as what is being mobilized back here as we use the term. It's an objectivity which is based on the ideal detached observer, God or some kind of scientist, and it's based on a metaphor of the objective as something which deals with firm, clearly bounded objects. So when we're making bids for authority based on these things, and when we're trying to mobilize understanding in these things, when we're trying to convince people of these things, of course we want to claim that our position comes from a position which is detached, and we want to make a claim that the things we're talking about are hard, firmly bounded objects. And that goes right through atheist and theist claims alike. Thank you.